Athens presents itself as a just city and the birthplace of democracy. In modern times, we perceive democracy as equality for all. Nevertheless, Athenian equality was only experienced by citizen men. Citizen women were at the mercy of their state and their kyrios. Women were confined to the gynaikeon, traditionally the upper part of an Attic house. Men placed women in the gynaikeon to prevent adultery. Solon's reformatory laws on adultery did not legislate on men cheating on their wives through pederasty or a relationship with a non-citizen, as this was permitted. Solon's laws allowed a cuckolded husband to kill his wife's lover with impunity, as seen in Euphilides' defence speech. Meanwhile, cheating women were ostracised from society, banned from religious festivals, and often divorced. I find this contrast interesting as these views persisted throughout history. For example, women were mothers and housebound until the 20th century, with rare exceptions of matriarchy such as Elizabeth I. We can also see women rise up against this oppression with the suffrage and land girl movements. However, not every polis in Greece held these views. Spartan women were far more equal, but we still hold Athens up as the pinnacle of a democratic and forward-thinking society, as theirs is the history that has survived. Another instance where our perception of Attica is skewed is colour. Rather than a solemn and dignified world of worked stone, Attica was vibrant and colourful. Since antiquity, additions to artwork such as paint or accessories have faded or been lost. An example of this being the peplos chore. This dramatically alters our imagined view of classical Athens, full of polished marble and limestone, creating an air of pristine divinity. Contrary to this belief, Athenians had a clear grasp of colour, highlighted by paint residue found on temples and statues. Opposing the modern view that polished marble was a symbol of divinity and power, Athenians used colour to highlight attributes of the figure they were portraying. This grasp of colour is also seen through literary sources such as Homer, with epithets like Athene of the flashing eyes, rosy-fingered dawn, and wine-dark sea. Attica boasted the largest pantheon amongst the Greek poli. However, was their pantheon really individual? Was Attic worship reflective of worship throughout Greece? This brings me to Aphrodite. Aphrodite was not a part of Hellenic worship during Mycenaean Greece, as her name is not found in Linear B. Nonetheless, she is a fully fledged member of the pantheon by Homer's Iliad, implying that she came from another culture. The most common version of Aphrodite's birth involves Aphrodite rising from the sea foam and landing in Cythera after Uranus' castration. This links to both Ishtar, a Sumerian goddess, and her Phoenician counterpart Astarte, goddess of many things including love, war, and the planet Venus. There is evidence her cult migrated to Cythera around the 1400s. This would indicate that Aphrodite's birth symbolised the Phoenicians landing in Cythera with this new goddess. Cythera was a Spartan territory. Coincidentally, Sparta and Cythera are the only places where Aphrodite Aria is worshipped, linking to Astarte's war goddess status. Being the initial place introduced to Aphrodite, surely Cythera has the most accurate version of Aphrodite's attributes, opposing Attica, who could not fathom love and war being born of the same deity. As previously discussed, Athens presents itself as the birthplace of democracy, with tyranny not factored into the equation. However, this is just the narrative we are presented with after 510 with the removal of Hippias. Due to Athens' presentation of itself, and the way this was reflected in historic texts, I was almost completely unaware of tyranny in Athens. Stories of tyranny that I heard, such as the murder of Hippiarchos by Harmodius and Aristogeiton, seemed to be simply myth or moral tales. This highlights that Athens' retroactive removal of tyranny from their history was incredibly successful despite the fact that Attica was the last poli to relinquish power to a tyranny by a couple hundred years. One thing I found compelling about tyranny in the Archaic period was the translation of the word tyrannos. From a modern perspective, tyrant presents the image of a dictatorial, power-hungry leader, whereas, during the Archaic period, tyrannos better translates as king. This includes Oedipus Rex's original Greek title being Oedipus Tyrannos, or Oedipus the King. Additionally, Zeus's epithet in Hesiod's Theogony when overthrowing Kronos was Basileus, another word for king/tyrant. The Pesistraton era of tyranny fascinated me, as it was not a period of Athenian culture I had previously explored. Specifically, I was intrigued by Pesistratos and his life, how he created the men from beyond the hills, made Megacles and Lycurgos change from his enemies into his allies, and his marriage to Megacles' daughter, creating the infamous Oukatanomon. The method he used to ensure his second tyranny was, to me, the most intriguing thing about him. If I had read it in a book, I would have thought it was a ridiculous plotline. It's no surprise Herodotus called it the silliest trick which history has to record. Parading through Athens with Phae dressed as Athene, then claiming the Acropolis and by association the city of Athens itself, which no one questions as the goddess bore witness, despite never being visibly seen by the people of Athens before this point. Concluding this entry, I noticed how similar the demes from the democratic age of Athens were to the political groups, such as the men from beyond the hill and the men from the plains from the Pisistraton era, highlighting that Pisistratos was not a tyrannical dictator with the definitions we currently have, which is true of most Athenian tyrants, as his political ideas followed into the Athenian age of democracy, aiding into the idea of the golden age of Pisistratos. It is clear that Attic definitions of democracy greatly differ from ours, with the exclusion of the majority of the populace, from metics and women to slaves. But it did not occur to me that a deeply patriarchal society would herald a female goddess as their predominant deity besides Zeus. Athenians openly oppressed women, but they were obsessed with the ideal woman, highlighted through Attic theatre, which heavily featured thought-provoking female characters such as Clytemnestra and Medea. But there is still contention over whether women were permitted to attend the theatre to be privy to these introspective and psychologically motivated women that men heralded. Personally, I find the lack of Attic female voices fascinating. We believe Athens reflects an oppressive pan-Hellenic view on women. However, women had far more rights in alternative pole. We also have female poets such as Sappho, who was heralded as the 10th muse by Plato. Marina Warner states that the female form provides the solution in which the essence itself is held. She is passio and acted upon. The male is actio, the mover. But Athene, through definition of being a war goddess, cannot be acted upon and instead presents more outwardly male characteristics through this. But also being the goddess of wisdom seems more passio as wisdom itself, Sophia, is a woman. This presents Athene almost androgynously. This is also seen in Clytemnestra and Medea. They are strong women through their employment of both male and female traits. This brings into question, once again, why the Athenians were so adamant that women had to be passive, as all their idealised women are actio, and appear androgynous within their own narratives, yet these traits in real women are punished and frowned upon. Additionally, according to Winston Churchill, it has been said that democracy is the worst form of government except all those other forms of government that have been tried from time to time. However, our form of democracy is based on Athenian democracy from 2,500 years ago. Therefore, should we not aim to update our democratic system to better suit our modern-day needs? Admittedly, we have adapted democracy slightly, with women and teenagers all being allowed to vote. But, to reiterate, this is adapting an ancient system rather than reinventing it. Due to this, it is my opinion that we need to remake our democratic system, or end up destroying ourselves trying to cling to what we perceive to be the grandest time in human history, despite its oppressive stance towards everyone who was not an elite citizen man. Initially, I believed we would look at Athene's relationship with Athens and Attic religious festivals such as the Panathenaea. I was pleasantly surprised that we looked into lesser-known characters from Greek mythos, such as Erichthonius and Metis, as I find their connection to both Athene and myth as a whole very engaging. Personally, Metis' story always intrigued me and provided an interesting parallel between Zeus and his father Kronos, but it also creates contrast. Kronos' reaction to the prophecy that he would be surpassed by his child led him down a path of cannibalising his own children, becoming the villain in his own story. Whereas, Zeus' reaction is similar in that he subsumes his pregnant wife Metis, who helped him defeat his father in the first place. Kronos' cannibalism teaches him nothing, and his position remained at risk. But Zeus subsuming Metis allows him to gain all her wisdom and feel safe in the knowledge that he will not be overthrown by any of their children. However, this does call into question whether Athene is the child born of Metis, fated to overthrow her father, or if she is just Metis in a new form, escaped from Zeus. As discussed in the lesson, Athene has multiple epithets, including the unmothered one and Polymetis, meaning she is in many ways her mother, suggesting that she is the one to overthrow her father. It can also be argued that, in Attic society, Athene did, in a way, overthrow her father, as she was the most prevalent deity, as Athens was named after her, and the largest temple in Athens is dedicated to Athene, with this temple overlooking her father's at the bottom of the Acropolis. Now, this is not to say that Zeus was disregarded by the Athenians, as that would be sacrilegious, and he was still worshipped as the king of the gods, but Attic society held Athene in a higher regard as their patron goddess and namesake to their city and their people. Eros was very influential over Hellenic society, but Greek love refers to a pederastic relationship between an Erastes and an Eromenos. The Attic brand of pederasty is complex, as outlined in Plato's Symposium by Pausanias, who explains that Elis, Boeotia and Sparta allow pederasty, and they have no issue if a young boy is seen to gratify his lover, explaining that, due to the inhabitants of these areas being poor speakers, they are unable to charm potential Eromenoi eloquently. Juxtaposing this, Ionia and Persia condemn pederasty due to their dictatorial natures. In Athens, pederasty was believed to be the highest form of love one could experience, and therefore Uranian eros. Uranian eros being love only two men could experience, which, according to Plato's Dialogue Symposium, allowed access to the metaphysical forms, therefore making it the purest form of love. Attic pederasty was seen as a lesson to teach young boys how to become men. Athenian custom encourages the lover to pursue and the beloved to flee, but an Erastes was allowed to pursue to great lengths, such as camping on doorsteps or voluntarily committing to slavery. This behaviour would be viewed as completely unacceptable if in the pursuit of a woman, as the relationship between men and women could only be pandemian eros, or common love. A subversion of this is also present in Symposium through the pederastic relationship between Socrates and Alcibiades. Alcibiades was considered the most beautiful youth in Athens. He was also an Alcmeonidae, therefore coming from a very wealthy aristocratic family, whereas Socrates was a street philosopher, viewed as a nuisance to the public, the low-class son of a stonemason who was considered very unattractive. Socrates and Alcibiades were an unlikely pederastic pairing. In Symposium, we can see the transgressive approach Alcibiades has to his pederastic partnership with Socrates through his repeated attempts to seduce him. Plato highlights Alcibiades' transgressive nature as he enters the dialogue by presenting Alcibiades in a drunken stupor, having just destroyed and defaced the city's herms. This also links to Alcibiades' failed invasion of Sicily that was supposedly taking place the day after the events Plato writes about in this dialogue, once again contributing to Alcibiades' transgressive nature despite the fortune life afforded him. As previously discussed in my earlier entries, Athens heralded itself as the birthplace of democracy, and by proxy, equality. But, as we know, this equality was short-ranging. Additionally, history is written by those in power, so our knowledge of ancient Athens is from the viewpoint of those elite men. There are vast proportions of Athenian society that go unnoticed within surviving documentation, mainly women, slaves and metics. Therefore, was the freedom we perceive a reality? Freedom was scarcely experienced by an Athenian woman. A woman's existence was defined by her family. Her husband would be chosen for her, and once she moves from her paternal kyrios to her marital one, she's in a very awkward place within her new family. Women were only for the production of legitimate children and organising the household. However, this presentation of women comes from our knowledge of wealthy Athenian households, rather than women in a lower class bracket. One point where we can perceive women fighting against their institutionalised oppression is in Aristophanes' Lysistrata, in which the women of Greek Polei involved in the Peloponnesian War withheld sex from their partners. This command over their bodies allowed the negotiation of a peace treaty, highlighting female intuition and intelligence, despite how they are treated by their kyrioi in everyday life. For example, if a woman was unable to produce children, even if her marriage was a rare love match, she would oftentimes be divorced because the production of legitimate children was so vital. The oppression of women goes even further, as Athenian women could not leave their houses without male supervision. This supervision could range from a grandfather to a little brother. This clearly places women lower in status compared to any man. Due to this constant supervision, it is no wonder that we have no female Attic writers, and yet, as discussed in my third entry, Attic society was obsessed with the ideal woman. Slavery in Athens was a huge part of daily life. Slavery was used to build temples and houses, cooking, cleaning, and farming, and oftentimes they were used as sexual property. How can this be with our views on democracy? We need to ask the question, can we have radical democracy without slavery? Almost all democratic societies, both of today and the past, were built off the backs of a large slave population. Additionally, by keeping slaves and outsourcing their workforce, Athens had the ability to become the philosophizing capital of the world because they were not spending their time on manual tasks. It has also allowed them to create the first versions of democracy. As unfortunate as it is to say it, in places like Athens, I do not believe we could have a radical democracy without slavery. Without the freedom for thought and philosophy created by the slave population performing all manual tasks, would there have been time to think of democracy? We often associate slavery with the distant past, which was done away with by democracy, but, by all accounts, slavery in many forms continued into the modern age. Statistics suggest that there are as many as 10 million people today subjected to modern-day slavery. British law allowed the owning of another human up until 2010, despite the fact that slavery was supposedly abolished in 1865.